Every Norwegian citizen is sitting on roughly $310,000 of oil money, and they still pay some of the highest taxes on earth. If your government found this kind of money tomorrow, it would be gone by lunch. Tax cuts, new highways, vote-buying projects with ministers' names on them. You know exactly how this story ends, but Norway built a vault. A psychological prison for money so secure that politicians can't touch it without committing career suicide. $1.7 trillion. That's more than the entire GDP of Australia, more than Saudi Arabia's fund, more than China's. The largest pile of sovereign wealth ever accumulated by a democracy. And here's what makes economists lose sleep. Democracies aren't supposed to work like this. They're designed to spend. Politicians need votes. Voters want stuff. The math always wins. So how did a frozen fishing nation of 5 million people pull off the greatest act of collective self-control in modern economic history? It starts with a Christmas miracle in 1969, a disaster that killed 123 men, and a decision that looks like boring accounting, but is actually financial martial law. December 23rd, 1969. A rusted drilling platform in the North Sea. American roughnecks from Phillips Petroleum have been punching holes into the seabed for months. Nothing. Dry well after dry well. The board back in Texas is ready to pull the plug. Norway is about to abandon this whole offshore fantasy and go back to fishing. Then the drill bit hits something different. Pressure spikes. Men start screaming. Ecofisk, one of the largest offshore oil fields ever discovered in the Western world. Norway, a country known for cod and cross-country skiing, just won the geological lottery. But here's what most people don't know. Winning the lottery usually destroys you. Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves on Earth, larger than Saudi Arabia. Today, 90% of their population lives in poverty. People use cash as napkins because it's cheaper than buying actual napkins. Nigeria discovered oil in the 1950s. Their GDP per capita is lower today than it was in 1980. Libya's sovereign wealth fund, once worth $60 billion, was essentially stolen during the civil war. This is called the resource curse. Oil arrives like a flood. If your institutions aren't already built, your country drowns. Norway watched these disasters unfold in real time, and they realized something terrifying. That's their future if they don't build a dam. But the dam couldn't just hold back water. It had to hold back something far more dangerous: human nature. Let's be clear about who the enemy is in this story. It's not foreign corporations, it's not OPEC, it's not even the volatility of oil prices. The villain is democracy itself. In a democracy, politicians need votes. Voters want lower taxes, better hospitals, free stuff. If you're sitting on $1 trillion and you don't spend it, your opponent will promise to spend it, and they'll win. This is why every oil democracy eventually eats itself. The incentives are aligned toward destruction. Norway's founders understood this. They knew that the biggest threat to Norwegian wealth wasn't a foreign invasion or a market crash. It was a Norwegian politician standing in front of a camera saying, "I will give you what's yours." So they designed a system with one goal: make the money untouchable. Not hidden, not secret. Everyone knows exactly where it is, just untouchable. They built a vault with 3 locks, and each lock was designed to neutralize a specific human weakness. The first lock is geographical. When the fund was created in 1990, they made a rule that sounds almost paranoid. The money cannot be invested in Norway. No Norwegian stocks, no Norwegian real estate, no Norwegian bonds. Every single krone must leave the country. Why? Because if the money stays home, it causes a disease. When oil revenue floods into an economy, it pushes up the currency. A stronger currency makes your other exports expensive. Suddenly your furniture, your fish, your technology, everything that isn't oil, becomes overpriced on global markets. Your non-oil industries die. Everyone rushes to work in oil or government jobs funded by oil. Your entire economy becomes a one-legged stool. Then the oil price crashes and you collapse. This is exactly what happened to the Netherlands in the 1960s. They discovered natural gas, their currency spiked, and their manufacturing sector withered. Economists literally named the disease after them: Dutch disease. Norway's solution was brutal. Quarantine the money, send it abroad, buy Apple shares in California, office buildings in Tokyo, government bonds in Berlin, anywhere but home. The fund now owns, on average, 1.5% of every publicly listed company on Earth. Think about that. The last time you bought an iPhone, Norway got a cut. When you watched Netflix last night, a fraction of your subscription flowed to Oslo. They own pieces of 9,000 companies in 70 countries. And here's the part that keeps game theorists up at night. Because the fund is invested entirely in foreign assets, if Norway's economy collapses, the fund actually becomes more valuable in local currency terms. They've built a hedge against their own failure. The second lock is mathematical. It's called the fiscal rule, and it's the most important number in Norwegian politics. The government can only spend the expected real return of the fund each year. Originally 4%, now 3%. Let me show you what this means. The fund is worth $1.7 trillion. 3% of that is about $50 billion. That's the maximum the government can transfer to the national budget, period. 50 billion sounds like a lot. But Norway's total government spending is around $230 billion. So the oil fund covers maybe 20 to 25% of the budget. The rest comes from taxes. Regular taxes, high taxes, income tax, wealth tax, 25% VAT. Norwegians are sitting on $310,000 per person, and they still pay 45% marginal income tax rates. This is the part that makes politicians in other countries physically ill. You have the money, it's right there, and you just don't use it. The logic is simple, but requires almost inhuman discipline. If you only spend the returns, you never touch the principal. The golden goose keeps laying eggs forever. But the moment you start eating into the principal, the moment you break the 3% rule, you've started a countdown. The fund shrinks. The returns shrink. Eventually, there's nothing left. Venezuela ate the goose. Norway collects eggs. And here's where it gets dark. In 2008, the fund lost 23% of its value in a single year. The global financial crisis wiped out hundreds of billions. Politicians were under enormous pressure to break the rule, to dip into the fund, to help struggling families. They didn't. They watched the fund bleed, and they did nothing. They stuck to 3%. That's not policy, that's religion. But let's not pretend this wealth came free. March 27th, 1980. The Alexander Kielland platform in the North Sea. It was a floatel, a floating hotel for offshore workers. At 6:30 p.m., one of the platform's 5 support columns cracked. Within 20 minutes, the entire structure capsized in freezing black water. 123 men died. It remains the worst disaster in Norwegian offshore history. Many of the bodies were never recovered. This is the part that gets left out of the Norwegian success story. The fund exists because men climbed onto steel platforms in some of the most dangerous waters on Earth. Some of them didn't come home. The wealth isn't abstract. It has a body count. And yet, and here's where Norway reveals its peculiar character, the disaster didn't stop the drilling. It led to some of the strictest safety regulations in the industry. Norway decided that if they were going to extract this oil, they would do it as safely as humanly possible. But they would extract it because they'd already done the math. The oil was worth more than the risk. The future was worth more than the present. Cold? Absolutely. Scandinavian? Perhaps. The third lock is psychological. The fund publishes everything. Every holding, every vote at every shareholder meeting, the CEO's salary. You can go online right now and see exactly what Norway owns, down to the last share of stock. This radical transparency serves a purpose that goes beyond accountability. It makes theft almost impossible. In Malaysia, the 1MDB fund was supposed to finance development. Billions vanished into luxury yachts, Hollywood movies, and the pockets of connected insiders. It took years for anyone to notice. In Norway, if a single minister tried to redirect funds to a cousin's construction company, it would be visible to every journalist, every opposition politician, every citizen with an internet connection. Within hours, transparency is a lock. Corruption requires shadows. Norway eliminated the shadows. But here's the paradox within the paradox. This transparency also means Norwegian voters can see exactly how much money they're not getting. Every citizen can calculate their theoretical share. $310,000, sitting in a fund, earning returns, being invested in companies all over the world, and they can't touch it. There's something almost cruel about that. Knowing the money exists, watching it grow, understanding that you'll never see a check. Oslo has some of the most expensive housing in the world. Young Norwegians face the same impossible math as young people in London or San Francisco. They know their country is sitting on a fortune. They know they'll never inherit it directly. The fund belongs to everyone, and therefore belongs to no one. And now we arrive at the part that makes international audiences either laugh or scream: the Ethics Council. The fund has a committee of philosophers, lawyers, and human rights experts who decide what Norway will not invest in. No tobacco companies, no nuclear weapons, no cluster bombs. They've kicked out Walmart over labor practices. They've divested from Rio Tinto over environmental destruction. And in 2015, they started divesting from coal. In 2019, from oil exploration companies. Let me say that again. The fund that exists because of oil is now actively divesting from oil. A fund built on fossil fuel extraction decided that investing in fossil fuel extraction was unethical. The cognitive dissonance is almost poetic. Critics call it what it is: greenwashing on a civilizational scale. Norway made their fortune poisoning the atmosphere, and now they use that money to lecture the world on climate change. They're the drug dealer who uses their profits to fund rehab clinics. And it gets better. After Russia invaded Ukraine and European gas supplies collapsed, who stepped up to fill the gap? Norway, Europe's largest gas supplier. They made record profits selling hydrocarbons to desperate Germans. The same year they expanded their fossil fuel divestments, they were pumping more gas than ever. Is this hypocrisy? Or is it the messy, compromised reality of how transitions actually happen? The honest answer? Yes, to both. Norway isn't a moral exemplar. They're not climate saints. They're a small country that got lucky with geology and built a system to survive their own good fortune. The Ethics Council isn't virtue. It's brand management. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Even cynical, hypocritical, self-interested ethics are better than no ethics at all. If you want to understand just how rare Norway's discipline is, you don't need to look at Venezuela or Nigeria. Look at Canada. Alberta discovered oil around the same time as Norway. They created a similar fund in 1976, the Alberta Heritage Fund. Today, Norway's fund is worth $1.7 trillion. Alberta's fund is worth $16 billion. Same resource, same time frame, same democratic system, different outcome by a factor of 100. What happened? Alberta spent. They used oil revenues to cut taxes, fund programs, and avoid hard budget decisions. Every premier who promised fiscal discipline eventually broke. The money was too easy. The voters wanted it too badly. Norway built a vault. Alberta built a spending account. This comparison should haunt every politician in every resource-rich democracy. The alternative future isn't theoretical. It's a 2-hour flight from Oslo. It's called Edmonton. So what do we take from this? Is Norway's model replicable? Could your country do what they did? Technically, yes. The mechanisms aren't secret. Create a fund, invest abroad, limit withdrawals, be transparent. Practically? Almost certainly not. Because the Norwegian system requires something that can't be legislated. Trust. Trust that the government won't raid the fund. Trust that the next administration will honor the rules. Trust that voters will accept delayed gratification. Trust that everyone is playing by the same rules. Most countries don't have that trust. They don't have it because it was destroyed by corruption, by colonial extraction, by leaders who stole everything that wasn't nailed down. When people have been betrayed enough times, they stop believing that saving for tomorrow is anything but a scam. Norway had advantages that can't be exported. A small, homogeneous population, strong institutions that existed before the oil, a culture that punishes showing off, geographic isolation that limited corruption opportunities. They built the levees before the flood arrived. Most countries discover oil before they discover good governance. And once the money starts flowing, it's too late. Norway didn't get rich from oil. Every oil country gets oil. Venezuela has more. Russia has more. The Middle East has more. Norway got rich because they distrusted themselves. They looked at the money and saw a weapon. They looked at their politicians and saw thieves in waiting. They looked at their voters and saw a mob that would consume the future to feed the present. And they built a prison to protect themselves from themselves. That's not a miracle. That's not luck. That's the terrifying realization that the enemy isn't out there. The enemy is the person in the mirror. Most countries can't copy Norway, not because they don't understand the model, because they don't trust their politicians, and their politicians don't trust them. Thanks for watching. If you want to see what happens when a country tries to build Norway's model from scratch, in the desert, with $500 billion and a city that doesn't exist yet, watch our video on Saudi Arabia's Neom. It's either the future of sovereign wealth or the most expensive ghost town in human history. I'll see you there.